Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Really excited to have you here. Very grateful that you took some time out of your day to join us to talk about cybersecurity risk quantification in the age of artificial intelligence or AI. We have a lot to cover, but before I start, just want to do some quick introductions. My name is Jeff Schwartz. I'm the head of business development here with Acrisure Cyber Services. And I'm joined here today with our two experts on all things cyber risk, risk quantification, and obviously in AI risk, to the extent that you can be an expert in AI, which I think is a challenge for all of us at this point. I want to introduce you guys to Dan Bacco and Max Bobbies. Dan is a former Secret Service agent with experience across presidential protection detail. He also has a long consulting background, worked with some large organizations like Mazars, USA, PwC, Hillard Hines, and others. Max Bobby's here is our head of risk advisory, and he's got a multiple decade long career in the cyber risk advisory world before it was even called cyber risk, which Max, I'm sure you can appreciate. He supported organizations like NATO, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, the World Bank, and many others. So we have an awesome panel here today. I'm just the lucky guy who gets to be around smarter people. And again, very grateful for you guys to be here. Let's kick this off. What's the reason behind all of this, right? Organizations for decades have spent so much time building cybersecurity programs, governance frameworks, risk management processes, fundamentally to help leaders make informed decisions about technology risk. Now that AI is being adopted at a pace which is unlike really anything we've ever seen across multiple functions, business units, use cases, et cetera, it's become a more significant challenge. So while the technology is new, the challenge is familiar, and ultimately it's understanding where risk exists, how significant it is, and who's accountable for managing it, and how to balance innovation that comes with the usage of AI with appropriate oversight. So what's really interesting is that AI risk management, it's not really a core cybersecurity discipline. It's an extension of enterprise risk governance that introduces new threat vectors, new regulatory and compliance considerations, new forms of business exposure. And as organizations grapple with issues such as data integrity, model security, third-party AI services, IP, emerging regulations, the conversation really naturally shifts from identifying risks to measuring them. And that's where cyber risk quantification becomes particularly valuable. It's providing a way to prioritize investments, evaluate trade-offs, communicate AI-related risks in business terms that executives and boards can understand, compare, and then ultimately act upon. So before we jump into AI, I really think it's important that we establish some context. As I've already mentioned, organizations have spent the better part of 20 years investing heavily in cybersecurity. We've seen billions of dollars invested across technology platforms, threat detection capabilities, identity management, resilience programs, compliance initiatives. I think you guys get the point, right? Despite all of that investment, cyber risk remains one of the top concerns for boards and executive teams. So let's start here. First question for the panel. Prior to the explosion of AI, what were the biggest cybersecurity and risk management challenges organizations were already struggling with?
Yeah, I'll start off, Jeff. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of challenges in this cybersecurity domain with commercial organizations and government agencies, and a couple things stand out. First, cybersecurity has become increasingly effective from a technology perspective, but a lot of organizations still struggle to connect cybersecurity activities to business outcomes. One of the things that comes out is that working with clients, it's not unusual for the chief information security officer or the head of IT to have on their roadmap, their investment roadmap, a constant sort of overlapping of the Venn diagrams of solutions, right? They want to make sure the ones that have the budget want to make sure they're not missing anything. And so tends to be a little bit of overlap on the technical side and also refresh. So as new tooling comes out, some vendors come out with the next best widget, and that'll replace an older system or service. And so there's this natural churn on the technical side when we look at solutions in the market. And that's sort of a normal way of being for those in charge of these systems. But the second thing that comes up is that a lot of organizations, while they've accumulated a lot of these tools and they have that normal churn, a lot of the business leaders still can't really answer some basic questions. So when they're talking with their whoever's in charge of the cybersecurity program, they still struggle to understand what are the most significant cyber risks to their organization. Other questions that come up are things like, well, how much risk are we actually carrying based on our current solution set in our cybersecurity program? They can't really they can't really get a full picture of what their cyber risk profile looks like. And that leads into other questions around, well, how do we, what's the right blend of investments that will reduce the risks that we're carrying? So if you're not sure about the most significant risks and how much risks you're carrying, then it becomes even more of a challenge to understand the blend of investments that are required to manage your cybersecurity risk. And then, of course, prioritizing what those investments look like. So the challenge really hasn't been about the lack of security or technical data. It's really been it's about translating that information into meaningful business decisions. And and now with the current environment, these the threat landscape is becoming ever more complex. With the introduction of AI, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. You've got the threat landscape, which is now, threat actors are affecting tailored attacks at speed constantly. And so when you have the adoption of a more complex environment where you have cloud services, you have companies going purely to cloud services and infrastructure as a service. You now have the challenges posed by third party risk factors, remote work, other rapidly evolving regulations that are occurring both at the federal level and in many states, and if you're operating internationally with other regions around the world. And so those dependencies in your digital ecosystem are just becoming more complex. And so the challenge continues to manifest in terms of the technologies, the solutions, the risks, and how do we understand, how do we get to the point where business leaders can understand what those cyber risks are and then make decisions about properly investing in the right solution blend. I mean, I can go on and on, but I'll stop there for the moment.
No, that's really interesting, Max. And one of the things that I took away from that is technical challenges may be potentially easy to communicate if you're speaking from the perspective of whoever within the organization has direct oversight in the cybersecurity environment. But maybe communicating the business value of those investments is a little bit more challenging, or potentially lost in translation altogether. So with that in mind, how would you, if you were to step in the chief information security officer role, explain to non-technical leaders the overall value proposition of investing in a range of resources, whether it be people, processes, tools, budget, time, to adequately solve for the cybersecurity challenges that exist?
Yeah, no, that's another great question. And I would welcome Dan's comments after I finish my attempt at answering here. No, what I find to be most interesting and persistent across my own experience and my own work with clients is that some things remain constant through time, and unfortunately, you have this challenge. This kind of is a follow on to the earlier question, but it's relevant to this one. Is that of language, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been with a client in the management team meeting or a briefing, and you have the head of IT or the head of information security, and they're talking at the business leaders, and they're throwing information at them about things like, well, how what are the metrics around the networks that are getting scanned by adversaries? How many attacks have we thwarted? How many incidents have we mitigated? What are we looking at in terms of KPIs and whatnot? What are we looking at in terms of an upgrade on the MFA platform or other services that have to be brought into the environment? But what happens is they're talking different languages. So the head of IT or the information security or cybersecurity is talking one language, and that's a very technical language. And then the business leaders are talking a completely different language, and that's the language of dollars and cents. That's the language of balance sheet risk. That's the language of where do we make investments so I can protect shareholder value or to protect enterprise value in a manner that can drive or continue to protect the bottom line in terms of profitability. So they're actually talking two different languages. And so when we start talking about investing in ranges of resources like the people, processes, tools, budget, and then time, well, the common denominator is actually money. And so that's usually where the conversation falls apart in these meetings. And so, in order to solve the cybersecurity challenges, especially in the age of AI, you have to take a step back and start talking the language of money, and that requires a little bit of a paradigm shift for the information security leadership because they're not used to that. And so what inevitably is a cybersecurity conversation turns into a business resource discussion, or in many cases, what we used to call business process reengineering or a change management activity. And with AI now, that continues to be an ongoing challenge. So, language is the first step that if you're going to be if you're going to own the cybersecurity program, you have to learn to talk dollars and cents and explain it in those terms. That will inevitably drive a more robust conversation and drive more collaboration inside the decision making process. I don't know, Dan. What do you? I mean, I know you've got your own experiences from your past. I mean, what are your thoughts on something like that?
Max, I'm glad you said collaboration because that's one other thing that I wanted to just bring out, in this answer to this question is in years past, you had your chief security officer that was just responsible for the physical security piece, and you had the chief information security officer or the CIO that's responsible for the technical piece, and of course the CFO is responsible for the money, if you will. And as we've seen all of us collectively on this call, as technologies expanded throughout the years, when when we at Acrisure, when we do our assessments, we're focused on the enterprise, and the enterprise has changed so much over the years where it's all interconnected. So the physical security responsibilities, the cameras, the guards, and gates are now interconnected with the IT systems, and at times done carefully the financial systems too. So we like to encourage and foster that collaboration between the C-suite responsible for physical, cyber, and financial, and having organizations that collaborate very, very well and basically talk a lot and collaborate on things like budgets and taking a look at the future state of where the organization is going. From a business operations standpoint, doing all that, the organization and the C-suite leaders are more effective. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect we'll get more into the how later. So I think we can table that part of the conversation for now. But um, one thing that keeps coming up as you guys were talking is like, okay, so organizations were already maybe struggling a little bit to connect cyber risk to business decision making. Now you introduce AI. Um, ha- what happens now that you introduce AI very suddenly? How does it impact that challenge? What makes this moment in particular different for organizations than maybe moments or series of moments that they've experienced in the past?
yeah, Jeff, I'll start. I think it's the speed of adoption, if you will. In previous years, there were always new technology solutions that were available, but organizations had time to assess, make informed decisions related to were they going to adopt this type of solution, or if they were moving into new markets, they would have the ability to take advantage of new technologies over time. But AI, as we know, has just taken everything by storm, and that the time available to, if you will, get up to speed and be even, for organizations to be smarter and assess what kind of AI solutions that they'd like to take advantage of. There's more challenges there, I think. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just
Go ahead, Max.
add some
Please,
additional
please.
thoughts around that? With the speed of adoption, you risk, getting ahead of your skis in a sense,
yeah.
if I could use that analogy, right? And we're actually seeing that in real time, not just with small companies, but actually large companies. Large companies are rushing into deploying AI-enabled platforms, models, and so on and so forth. And one of the challenges that we're seeing is that there, you have to manage and govern the implementation of these AI tools. Now, there's two ways to think about it, right? I just want to maybe set the stage a little bit. Is that if you're large enough, or if you have the appetite, you might be a business leader where you're deploying a model or an agent, and you're creating something to embed inside your environment. And so in doing that, you're leveraging a third party's capability. So it's really incumbent upon you as the business leader to understand that you have to use that in your own tenancy, and you have to put guardrails around that. You need to establish and define what is the objective you're trying to achieve rather than issuing this carte blanche capability. And so by framing that model and kind of putting ring fence around it, you can contain it and so on and so forth. So it's a challenge enough with large companies with adequate resources, but for small to medium sized businesses with maybe limited budget and capabilities on staff, you got to be really careful about how to deploy these agents and these systems inside your business, because the potential for these agents or these models to be deployed, if you're not governing them appropriately and you're putting those guardrails around them, you can actually run the risk of opening up your data to other third parties and creating exposures in ways that you're not even 100% sure that, or even realize that you're doing. So, and that could probably take up the rest of this conversation. But the speed of adoption is extraordinary. It's an extraordinary capability, but you have to be real thoughtful about how you move forward in deploying these capabilities in your systems.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Max, that AI risk, when people hear the term AI risk, because AI is technology, there's an assumption that it is inherently a cybersecurity issue. But I think what you guys have just highlighted is that it's an economics issue. It's a cost benefit analysis issue, right? If we know we need it, but we know we need to put guardrails around it, where do those guardrails go, right? It's identifying the property line, and then establishing guardrails based on where that is. And so that leads me to my next question for you guys, and hopefully this is a good segue. Is AI risk fundamentally different from cyber risk, or is it really just an evolution of cyber risk and maybe cyber risk management writ large?
Do you want to
Correct.
start? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
or jump in and go
Yeah,
ahead.
sure. Sorry. Yeah, Dan and I both have thoughts on this. Is that the real answer is that it's both, right? And
Yeah.
and so when you look at AI risk, it includes, in order to manage AI risk, it includes traditional thinking about risk, what I would call traditional risk management thought processes. So oftentimes in our world, we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework as a starting point for a conversation about, when a company is looking to implement a cybersecurity program and structure their program on best practices, right? It's sort of like the starting point. Uh, NIST came out with a similar risk management framework for AI. Now, there are different models to use and govern AI risks. And so there's not one that kind of checks all the boxes. You kind of have to pull them together and tailor them for your environment. But it rests on things like risk management best practices, governing the risks associated with these capabilities, whether it's the cybersecurity capabilities or AI capabilities, is central to NIST framework for both. And so you have a little bit of Venn diagrams overlapping, but the difference between the NIST CSF on the cyber front and the AI RMF is that govern is front and center central. Everything kind of revolves around the governing process. And that's something I want to be really make sure I emphasize here on this for those listening is that you know, there are good tools out there. Acrisure Cybersecurity provides tooling to help manage some of the AI risks in your environment, but you have to govern it. That's part of it. You have to map, monitor, and measure what you're doing with your AI tooling. And so you have to understand what are the risks, right? Or can you trust the outputs from an AI tool, right? Who's accountable? Accountability is significant, right? Whether it's in cyber or understanding and owning the AI model and the outputs. Where's the data? Are we protecting it? Are we making sure that you have the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data? But in terms of the AI use, where's the data going? How is it being used? Are the outputs trustworthy? Are you monitoring for drift and things like that? So there's a lot of things that go into managing these tools, and AI is a different type of tool set that optimizes your environment. But there's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagrams between cybersecurity best practices and AI risk management practices. So go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry. I know you
Yeah,
wanted
Max,
to
you,
in there.
you, you explained it very well. My other comment would just be that in our collective work traditionally in the cybersecurity protection world, we've always been really focused on the protection of data, but introduce an AI solution into the organization. Um, I just feel there needs to be an additional heightened awareness related to data protection, how it's being utilized, as you mentioned, the outputs, and does the organization need to approach that focus on data protection differently than they are currently going? Luckily, there's, as you mentioned, the NIST standards, and there's some other great organizations out there that do produce guidance and information on how to do that. But as the AI world changes so much, there's always more work to be, there's always more focused work to be done, if you will. So,
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is cybersecurity is still the foundation of AI risk, if you want to think of it in broad terms, but governance around AI is really fundamental to ensuring that you're setting your environment up to be as protected as it can be. Obviously, as we know, there's no silver bullet, but it's almost like a chicken or the egg. Is it the cybersecurity as a foundation, or is it the government as a foundation? And really, what comes first? I don't know that there's a great answer to that, but I think they're both critically important. Hopefully that was the point you guys were trying to make. I'm curious though. So how should executives think about this, right? If you're thinking about the difference between, or potentially the relationship between cyber risk management, AI risk management, how should execs be thinking about that?
Jeff, I think that the one thing that we like to encourage business leaders to have these reoccurring conversations with everyone involved in the development and rollout of an AI solution, and also focusing on a couple different areas that we mentioned in the past. Governance and accountability is very, very important. Um, Figuring out and developing that AI use plan of how an organization is gonna roll out a solution, and then making sure that that plan is followed, and taking the time to have those strategic pause conversations, if you will, looking at what they've initially rolled out and seeing if there's there's a need for maybe a change in a focus or a way they're doing things. So, Max, I don't know if there's anything else that.
Yeah, no, in fact, I'll add a little extra color. One of the things that I've been a big advocate for over the years in working with leadership teams in driving cybersecurity resilience and maturity is establishing a working group, internal, like a cross-functional steering committee or whatever you want to call it. And oftentimes people, the initial reaction is, well, Isn't my IT guy or gal enough? No, because the IT guy or gal doesn't have balance sheet responsibility. And from a threat actor's perspective, the easiest way into your business is not through, directly trying to attack your networks. It's through your third party trust relationships. And that could be vendors, it could be your personal ecosystem through family and friends and social media exploitation and so on and so forth. So, driving a cyber resilient organization really depends on cross functional collaboration. Uh, AI takes that to another level because AI, while the skill set is different, you have to drive collaboration across the organization with stakeholders who become data owners of both the inputs and the outputs. And so the way to govern your AI deployment inside your environment is you have to constantly tend to it. I liken it to like standing up a beautiful garden inside the middle of a jungle. The first day you've got this beautiful garden and that's your AI deployment. But what happens is if you don't tend to it every day, monitor for weeds, or, in AI terms, monitor for things like drift, testing to make sure the outputs are actually performing as they need to, and making sure that you don't have the degradation of the AI outputs due to what we call recursive reuse of content. It's sort of like the snake eating its tail, where the outputs continue to inform the new queries, and so that drives further model poisoning and drift. And so you have to constantly tend it, and that's a different skill set. It still requires cross-functional collaboration inside the business, but it's not purely a cybersecurity function, even though you still have these cross-functional working groups. So I just wanted to emphasize the importance of cross-functional collaboration in both contexts.
Jeff, many organizations they appoint a chief AI officer, that is really focused on the day to day, if you will, operations, and they collaborate with the chief privacy officer, the general counsel, some of the other individuals that Max just mentioned, making sure that it's a day to day concern, focused concern in the organization, and there's one individual that can help collaborate and coordinate the AI organizational programs that are rolled out. So.
Yeah. I'm gonna use a World Cup analogy since we're all just coming out of watching more soccer than maybe we've ever watched in our lives over the last however many weeks. But it's almost like, if whether it's cybersecurity or it's AI, if you're gonna put a goalie in the net and then your defenders have never met that person. The midfielders have never met that person. Your forwards have never met that person. And now all of a sudden you're putting them on the field on the World Cup stage and you're asking them to play together and operate in, set pieces or corner kicks or what have you, and work together effectively to defend the net. It's probably not going to go as well as than if you had a team that you practiced together and you had the same set of standards and procedures and game plans, what have you. Max and Dan are probably secretly rolling their eyes because they've seen me use some of these silly analogies before. But it's so important to understand that cybersecurity, AI, the combination of those two things fundamentally are a business level issue that require all elements of the business to have a hand in managing. If you're solely relying on the quote unquote IT guy or gal, you're going to miss, and there's going to be gaps, and there's going to be exposures that you're unable to protect. Shifting gears here a little bit, listening to both of you guys, one thing that really stands out is that a lot of these challenges, didn't necessarily start with AI. I think a lot of organizations, particularly small and mid-sized businesses, were already wrestling with cyber risk, as we've talked about, third-party risk, regulatory pressures, cloud transformations, digital dependencies. AI didn't create those challenges. It potentially just amplified them, right? And so now we're asking executive leadership teams and boards to make decisions faster than ever around technology adoption, innovation, governance, and risk. And so it really raises an important question. If organizations are dealing with increasingly complex cyber risks, and then you're layering on AI risks on top of that, how do they separate signals from noise? How do they move beyond subjective conversations and actually understand really which risks matter most to the business, where they should be spending their energy? And so if you're a CEO or you're a board member or even just a business unit leader, simply hearing that a risk is rated high or critical doesn't necessarily tell you what needs to happen next. It doesn't tell you whether you're over investing or under investing or focusing on the wrong issues altogether. So let's start there. How should business leaders actually measure and communicate cyber and technology risk in a way that supports informed business decisions?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, for a long time, organizations have been generating a lot of cybersecurity data, right? We in fact, I've talked about it, right? You've got CISOs and IT leaderships that are, leaders that are really good at identifying vulnerabilities, detecting threats, reporting incidents and measuring control effectiveness, and then reporting out those KPIs to the business leaders. The problem is those metrics are operational in nature. They're not really business intelligence, right? You know, um, as a business executive, as a business owner, I should say, I'm not making business decisions based on vulnerability counts or how many attacks we've thwarted over the last month. Boards aren't allocating capital based on patching statistics, for example. But what the business leaders need to understand is, as I mentioned earlier, what are our exposures? What could actually happen to us if we were compromised in a certain manner, right? What would the business impact be? E.g., the natural extension of that thinking is how is that going to impact us financially? And then we need to look at things like likelihood, and then it sets the stage for how do we address that risk? How do we characterize that risk? How do we quantify it? And then how do we make business decisions about, that risk acceptance, the mitigation, or potentially even the transfer? And so, we need to move beyond that technical speak to financial speak. And I know I'm repeating myself now, but that's the common language on which we need to, move forward. I can't emphasize it enough. And ostensibly, insurance is part of that conversation, transferring some of that risk off the balance sheet, and understanding, what the risk looks like from a financial perspective, then informs that process. I'll just a quick segue, but it's probably meaningful because a lot of the people listening today are, they're either looking at cyber insurance, or they have cyber insurance and renewals are coming up, and then they might be ACS clients or prospects, and all these questions are circulating. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier is the disconnectedness between the business leadership and the technical leadership. That extends to the risk management leadership and those who are responsible for buying cyber insurance. You guys have heard me talk ad nauseum about the worst thing you can do is have the risk manager get your insurance questionnaire, give it to the IT guy or gal, and say, fill this out. And there's no discussion, right? We don't quite know what the value at risk is. And so all too often, in work that I've done previously, is that you see this disconnect between what is actually at risk inside a business and actually what's been transferred through the cyber insurance policy. So taking a step back and looking at that risk quantification and distilling it down to that common denominator is key, not only for the business leaders, but also to make informed decisions about what types of cyber insurance to buy, what levels of coverage to secure, and what retention levels might be most appropriate for your business. And so that again goes back to collaboration. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that note.
Jeff, I just think that strong cybersecurity leaders and their teams are the ones that have the ability to take that technical data and utilize a risk quantification strategy, if you will, and be able to take results and and brief the business leaders, which will allow them to uh, um, have an informed opinion of overall risk in the organization, and they can make those decisions accordingly. So, and back
Yeah.
to what Max just said, um, those that should be a continuous reoccurring conversation, focused on collaboration. And when it's time to have those, those important conversations related to budget and things like that, um, organizational risk isn't a surprise. It's something we've always been talking about, and let's figure out a way to protect our organization even in a stronger manner. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so Max, you called out this disconnect, right? Dan, you called out risk quantification. We're seeing more and more a growing interest, let's call it, in cyber risk quantification. Is that disconnect that you talked about fueling that interest, in your guys' opinion?
yeah, Jeff, I believe so, and just because a lot of it goes back to what we've been discussing, previously on this podcast is it it's more challenging all the time, the risks that are available, the risks that are out there, excuse me. And these risks are causing cybersecurity leaders, just there's more and more things that they have to worry about, and there's more and more data that that they have to take a look at and make decisions on, and having a strategy related to utilizing risk quantification will allow them to take all this data and have it in a format where they can make solid decisions, and it'll allow, and those decisions will be able to help the organization, manage the business piece, the financial piece, and the risk piece. So, Max, I don't know if there's anything else that.
Yeah, no, with risk quantification, I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but when we look at the speed with which technology is changing, with the speed of AI adoption, with the acceleration of and ever increasing sophistication of threat actor tactics, techniques, procedures in terms of affecting attacks, targeted and tailored attacks on assets. We've got the speed that is a challenge. And so, quantification used to be this long drawn out process. And so, accelerating that process and establishing the mechanisms inside the business to foster that cross-functional collaboration, whether it's in AI or the cybersecurity program, it establishes the mechanisms that drive institutionalization of best practices. At the same time, by cross-functionally educating your peers when you discuss things like, well, if this asset goes down in my environment, how does that impact the IT functionality of the network? That's one answer. How might that impact procurement decisions? That's a different answer. Are my systems going to be bricked? Will I have to go out and procure new equipment, new network infrastructure? What is that going to look like from downtime, and how might that render itself or result in lost revenue, consequential loss of revenue? Which also is an insurance term or coverage area. What does that look like from a training perspective? How might this impact the ability of my staff or my personnel to access systems if they're working remote? So there's all these things that come into play when we're talking about risk quantification, and there are material and meaningful financial impacts across the spectrum. And so those are just the things to keep in mind as we go down this path with the quantification discussion.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, what I'm hearing is AI isn't necessarily the driver for organizations being interested in quantifying their risk, but it's, maybe to overemphasize the point. It's accelerating the need to do so. What I think would be really helpful is if you guys can just take a moment. It doesn't have to be more than 60 seconds to just quickly explain what is cyber risk quantification, and if you can talk about maybe how folks utilize cyber risk quantification. I'm sure we're going to talk more about it later, but if you can just give us kind of an elevator pitch on what it is, I think that would be helpful for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, I'll start, Dan, because I mentioned earlier about how I used to do this in past lives. The way we would do quantification is through workshops. You know, you would coordinate these workshops and sit with the stakeholders, and you'd effectively have a whiteboard, and you get the different individuals to inform. Okay, what are we looking at in terms of scenarios, right? What are the threat scenarios? And then you drive agreement, and then you consensus. And so it's this, it could actually turn into an all afternoon kind of activity. Fast forward to today, we've now got a capability that we're bringing to market where we're actually using AI to go out and grab threat information against industries and against specific organizations. And so within an hour, we can generate a threat profile of an organization using those outputs. And we've actually sat and worked with a number of clients this year and validated what those threat profiles look like. And that's a process, but it's not an all afternoon process. It's more of like a 10-minute process. And then when you extend from there, you can start pulling in things like assessment activities. So, for example, irrespective of whether you have to comply with HIPAA or PCI DSS, or you're looking at implementing an ISO 27001 standard, or you just want to use the NIST CSF as a framework for moving forward. There's a variety of assessments that we can ingest in that process, so we can understand what the gaps look like in terms of what the organizational gaps are. And then you can feed your insurance policy. So if you have a cyber policy with different coverage areas, you can actually pull that data in, and you can see how much the organization is actually transferring off the balance sheet with specific coverages and the retentions. And you weigh that and you blend that into the model with the risk assessments and the vulnerability assessments and what your current gaps are. And then when you sit down and you figure out, well, what is the investment plan going forward for, say, that, we're in what? We're midsummer now in 2026. So between now and year end of the calendar year, what do we need to do to implement or to drive our cybersecurity program, in terms of a more mature posture? There might be 5 or 6 security control initiatives that we can profile and then blend into that. At the end of that process, which all can happen virtually and in very, very short order, probably in less than an hour's worth of investment with the client's time, is you can get a fulsome picture of what I like to refer to as enterprise value at risk, right? And the outputs, literally, you can see, okay, what might the cost be that if our risk is X and we need to bring down our risk from either an investment in an insurance policy that will cost X dollars, or maybe we invest in an MFA tool or an EDR solution or SIM or whatever, and that brings down our risk in a different immaterial way. Or it might be that there's a higher priority vulnerability that we didn't expect. And so all of those are what are rendered as part of that process. And again, as yeah, I'm continuing to repeat, what that effectively does is it automatically establishes that common denominator of money. So now the CISO, or the head of cybersecurity in your organization, and maybe the head of operations and the CFO, the risk manager, you're sitting around the table along with the business owner, and you're looking at what is your value at risk in terms of the business. And then you can make informed decisions collectively as a group rather than as an individual who may not have that balance sheet responsibility. And that provides transparency as part of the process, and collaboration, and ultimately organizational buy-in. So the natural outcome is a cyber resilient business that is better insured and better tooled and probably has better allocation of resources to people and the processes to support them in utilizing those tools going forward. So
Yeah,
rather
Max,
than
that's a
rather than the
no good.
days where we go half day working sessions to do one loss scenario, you can now do all of this in the span of maybe an hour or two's worth of effort.
Yeah. And Jeff, the nice thing about these assessments that we do too, it allows the client to just kind of take that strategic pause, and really just focus on, the answering these questions related to cyber risk, and it allows them to really think about, risk in the overall organization when a lot of them have other duties as assigned and things like that. So that's another byproduct that comes out of this. So
No, I think what you guys highlighted is a really important and significant shift in the way that we think about evaluating and assessing our quantifiable cyber risk. Something that was challenging, cumbersome, difficult, with limited technical capability is now something that's fundamentally technology driven, AI enabled, and can happen in a short period of time to allow for really good informed decisions to be made so you can optimize costs, so you can effectively cover yourself from an insurance standpoint. And nobody likes to spend money in a black box, right? And so if you have those data points to be able to help inform your investments, or the pullback of investments, there's tremendous value there. So I really appreciate you guys highlighting what it is, and really what those outputs are. If we can, I'd like to bring the conversation back to AI, and ask you guys if you can help folks understand how risk quantification supports organizations in making smarter decisions about AI and AI adoption, particularly.
some of those what cyber risk quantification, some of the benefits, Jeff, are we've talked about several of them already. Where should organizations make investments? You know, allows them to take a look at their current spend, at times their previous spend, and allows them to take that data and make some focused decisions on where they should go. Kind of moving forward. And it also provides a profile of overall risk in the organization. And at times, taking a look at that, it provides some benefits of, hey, we did not realize that um, there were other risks in these certain areas of the business that we never even thought about. And it really requires us to take some focused attention on making sure that we address those risks and deal with them. So, Max, I don't know if there's anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of, it's almost like soundbite-ish, right? What I'm
Right.
about to say. It's like with cyber, people ask me, well, what do you do? Well, if you distill it down to kind of one term, it's sort of, I try to demystify the what cybersecurity is for business leaders who aren't practitioners. And there's a lot of times where I've seen conferences or whatever, where or practitioners in the industry will create fear in potential prospects or the audience about cybersecurity. That's not to say there isn't legitimate concern in terms of the cybersecurity threat landscape. There is significant concern. However, it can be managed. And that's the thing that what we try to do is to number one, demystify what the cybersecurity conversation is for our clients, and then provide a roadmap forward to help them make informed business decisions about how best to prioritize the allocation of limited resources, right? Your resources being your people, as Jeff, you mentioned at the beginning, your resources are what? Your people, your processes, your tools, your funding, and your time. There's only so much of each that an organization has available. And in today's world, with the potential for inflation increasing, these resources are even more constrained and at a premium. And so informed decision making and prioritization of how best to use that blend of resources really is what we're trying to do. Number one, take away the fear. Number two, provide a mechanism for managing the risks associated with cybersecurity, and also take away the uncertainty and the vagaries around how to approach the implementation and risks around AI at the same time. So again, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of unknowns in the environment. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And what we're really trying to do is cut through all that to provide information and mechanisms for providing clarity on decision making.
Yeah.
And that, again, that common denominator for clear-eyed decision making is money.
Yeah. And Jeff, there's also that question always comes up of okay, we're going to make this investment. What can we expect from the investment outcomes and things like that? And that the risk quantification helps with that. And also you know they can take a look at what's our risk tolerance in the organization, and if we do this, what will be the outcomes, and that's that's an additional benefit that is that's paid. So
Yeah,
Yeah, and if you guys would,
sorry, I just
no,
want to add
please,
one
Max.
more thing. Sorry, Jeff. Sorry to
no,
interrupt.
yeah,
You
It's
know,
okay.
ostensibly we work for an insurance company, Acrisure.
yeah,
We reside at Acrisure Cyber Services, our standalone business unit. I want to make it clear to everybody on this who's listening is that nobody among the three of us is trying to sell cyber insurance. But what we are providing is the capability to inform how best to have those conversations with your broker, whether it's an Acrisure broker or another broker in the market. So we stand by those findings to help you make those informed decisions.
yeah.
Yeah, and if I can summarize and sort of bring it back to AI, I made a tongue-in-cheek comment at the beginning of this, when we started about nobody's really an expert in all things AI. Maybe the CEO of Anthropic or something. Maybe that person can call himself that. But the rest of us are just learning as we go. And I think what risk quantification helps you do to be repetitive, because I think it bears being repetitive, is make informed decisions around AI. Dan, you called out risk tolerance. Max, you called out controls that maybe need to be in place before you start investing in building models or deploying tools. And so what's really important to understand is that none of us really realistically know what AI is going to do, but we know that it is by and large going to be positive if we have an idea of how to control it. And I think we're all just going to continue to learn as we go. So it's really cool to see how the world of quantification has sort of evolved to help enable those AI decisions. One thing that we hear a lot, and I've heard this a lot in my career doing multiple different things directly and indirectly related to cybersecurity, but assessments in a vacuum are great because it gives you great information, but then the action that comes on the back of those assessments can sometimes fall by the wayside, right? It's you have a plan, but you never execute on it. Can you guys comment on how risk quantification helps you go from assessment to action? How can we translate those outputs into actually taking action?
Sure. I'll start on this one. So, it's think of it as like a journey, right? And the journey's already started. So we're kind of coming mid journey, right? The journey is the business, the life of the business, and we're coming in, and what we're doing is we're taking a snapshot in time of your cybersecurity capabilities. We're not necessarily doing a pen test. We're not necessarily doing a vulnerability assessment of your network. What we're really trying to do is assess where you are in terms of your overall organizational cybersecurity capabilities. And again, capabilities are the deployment and the effective interplay between resources. Again, people, processes, tools, money, and time. And so out of that, and every business is different, right? Out of that will come a roadmap. Number one, gaps, right? Capability gaps. But then there'll be a roadmap that is applicable to your business. And what applies for you doesn't necessarily apply to your neighbor or maybe even your peer in the industry. It's where you are in your business's journey. And so what the risk quantification does as the next step in that process is the assessment informs what that profile looks like. We then take what you're looking at in terms of your cyber insurance and then your existing capability set, right? What we would call control, your current state control profile, your security control profile. And then we factor all of that in. And then at the output, at the end of that process, is you can actually make informed decisions financially about how best to take action on the recommendations that are generated from the actual assessment itself. So it's sort of like the assessment is sort of like you're in the starting blocks, and the risk quantification piece is you're now running and you're making decisions about how to take action in real time. And so it's a dynamic process. It's the kind of thing where it's not a one and done thing. It's about continuous improvement over time, and those kind of set the stage for what I would call cyber resilient organizations where the institutionalization of capabilities is maximized, and those resources are best prioritized through the quantification process.
Gotcha. Well, thank you guys for everything. I feel like we're just getting started, and so unfortunately, we don't have unlimited time during the day. So I'm going to ask you all one final question. Um, if there's one takeaway that you want the CEOs, board members, CISOs, business leaders, IT leaders, whomever, to take away from this conversation regarding cyber risk, AI governance, cyber risk quantification, what would that one takeaway be?
Jeff, we mentioned it several times. I would say collaboration. It's the one great benefit that an organization can realize. Just having the C-suite, the leadership in the organization are responsible for physical security, data protection, technology, financial management. Having those reoccurring conversations about things like risk and how we're managing risk and how we're going to roll out AI and other different subjects. That some of the benefits of that is, number one, if unfortunately there is a cyber risk incident, they'll some of that will be discussed already, and the organization can react quickly in a more focused manage a way to manage it and deal with it. And as we've discussed, things like taking a look at budgets for the future. That should be a collaborative discussion too of all the individuals I mentioned earlier. So
Yeah, I'll build on what Dan said, and that internal working group or steering committee sets the stage for collaboration, sets the stage for cross-functional education, and also long-term buy-in when the subjects of resource allocation and prioritization come up. And critically, you have to keep in mind one final thing. In the world we're living in, is that there's no such thing as perfect cybersecurity. You as a business owner will one day encounter a situation where your business is compromised. And establishing that structure inside the business, that collaborative structure, you set the stage for a robust and engaged cyber incident response capability. So don't assume you won't be compromised. Assume you will. Take steps today to get organized, as Dan mentioned, and to start those conversations. Because if you take that approach of that cross functional collaboration to drive the institutionalization of best practices across your business, you will be cyber resilient. And when the day comes when you're compromised, you will be in the best position that you possibly can be in to respond to and recover from that incident in the most meaningful and proactive and rapid way. And on that note, I'll end it there.
Max, Dan, I appreciate you guys.
thank you, Jeff.
To everyone out there, thank you all so much for coming. Hope you got some value out of this. do your work early. That's my big takeaway. So you don't have to do nearly as much work, or it can be a little bit less stressful later. So again, really appreciate you guys. I think we've got some time for questions, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.